Welcome to the Friday Football Show on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm Alan Saunders, your host, and at least for this week, the only guy you're going to talk to. It's the Friday Football Show. It's a one-man operation. I'll be talking to you every Friday throughout the end of football season, and then, I don't know, maybe we'll come up with a new name for the show or move it from Friday or something. But this Friday, we're going to talk about all three levels about football in Pittsburgh. We're going to talk a little high school football, talk a little college football, talk a little pro football. It is the first week of the NFL season. The Pittsburgh Steelers are traveling to Cleveland to face the rival Cleveland Browns this week, although that's not what anyone that covers the Steelers is talking about right now. Of course, we've got Pitt and Penn State and another rivalry game scheduled for Saturday night over at Heinz Field. And an interesting topic that's been sort of percolating in high school football in Pennsylvania for a while that I want to touch on. And we're going to hit that first, actually. Pittsburgh Sports Now, which is where I write most of my coverage, covering Pitt football, Duquesne football, and high school football this time of the year. We're covering the North Allegheny Central Catholic game this week. Steve Brenner will be our reporter up there in Wexford, and it's a big game. The two 2-0 teams in Class 6A, a couple of powerhouses, a couple of teams that are perennially among the better schools in the WPIAL, and actually, incidentally, a couple teams are going to have a whole bunch of their alumni on the field at Heinz Field this Saturday. Elijah Zeiss, Sean Idowu starting for Pitt, and DeMar Hamlin. You got a couple Central Catholic guys for Penn State as well. So it's a big matchup. It's a matchup full of prospects. It's a matchup full of playoff implications, championship implications, and in general, just should be a good football game. It's a couple of really well-coached teams. Last I heard, North Allegheny is expecting basically a capacity crowd. So yeah, all that's great. But to me, this game is sort of an interesting timing because just this week, the PIAA held public hearings about whether or not to keep private schools and public schools in the same sphere of competition in high school sports. And to me, I think this game right here is a pretty good example of why those schools belong together. I mean, if you look at the highest classification of WPIAL football right now, Central Catholic isn't some sort of dominant force that can't be stopped. It's not a team that presents some sort of unfair advantage. It's just a good football team that competes with other good football teams, sometimes wins, sometimes loses, and it does it generally at a very high level. It's a great program, but it's not like they've won the league 5 of the last 7 years or something like that. High school football in Western Pennsylvania, to me, is always going to be too competitive for that to happen. Maybe that's not the case everywhere in Pennsylvania. Maybe that's not the case in every sport. But at least if we're talking about high school football, I don't believe that, especially at the higher levels, or really any level, that the Catholic schools have any sort of large competitive advantage. And I think if they did, you'd look at the list of champions that hangs on the wall in Heinz Field and see nothing but Catholic schools. And that's not what you see. You see a good mix of predominantly public schools, and yeah, some Catholic schools win some championships sometimes, whether it's Central Catholic, whether it's a Seton LaSalle, depending on the level. There are others that have competed as well, but it's not like the Catholic schools are running away with things. And I think in general, the thought that, oh, well, the private schools, the Catholic schools, the charter schools, they present some sort of unfair advantage, that thinking is outdated, I think, honestly, because I think what you're seeing and what the trend is that charter schools are being better funded. They're more popular than ever. They have a greater interest in athletics than they did, say, 10 or 20 years ago. I mean, charter schools started out, they were focused on education, and athletics took a back seat. But now that many of them have become established over a number of years, athletics have become an important part of what they offer. And you're not going to put that horse back in the barn. That's not going to stop happening. In fact, that's just going to increase happening. And the idea that high school sports needs to be geographically based is a very traditional one, but I'm just not sure one that's feasible going forward. I think the idea of all the kids from this town playing against all the kids from this town over here, I'm not sure we're going to see that functionally really at any level. And so then what do? By splitting up the schools, you're eliminating this big game. You're eliminating the possibility of there being two very high-level teams with a bunch of Division I prospects on each side playing against one another, and not just this game, but all across the higher levels of WPIAL football. You just water down the product, and I think they already watered down the product a great deal by going from 4 classifications to 6. Any idea that Catholic schools would exist outside of that structure, to me, just presents a further watering down of the product without any real upside. What's the advantage? Might there be occasionally, once every 4 or 6 years, a public school that wins a championship that otherwise would not have won a championship? Sure. But who does that really benefit? It doesn't benefit the end consumers, the people that watch high school football. I don't really feel like it even benefits the kids, because isn't it better to play on the best possible teams and to play the best possible games than to divide everybody up into an infinite number of classifications just so everyone feels like they have an equal chance of winning? I don't know. I think that there is a better way forward, though. And this 6 classes thing is not it, and separating the public schools from the private schools from the Catholic schools is not it. And I do think there's a way. And really what it comes down to is the classification system in football is meant to prevent mismatches. It's to prevent a level playing field, right? So there are some schools with more kids, and just as a functional matter, they have more access to talent than smaller schools. And so that's how, for a long time, high school sports has been broken up, right? The big schools play the big schools, the middle schools play the middle schools, and the small schools play the small schools. And for a long time, that worked out pretty well. Now we've gone to 6 classifications. What you have is you have a bunch of schools that are playing up, because the difference between 1A and 2A and 3A, or the difference between 3A and 4A and 5A, it becomes smaller. There's less of a difference between each classification. And so a lot of schools choose to play up because they want to play their traditional opponents. They want to have a better travel schedule. They want a more challenging schedule. I mean, if you're, an Aliquippa or a Clairton, a couple of schools that have had a straight decade of success, basically, they want to challenge their teams. They want to compete at a higher level. And they're allowed to do that, but the corollary never happens. The big schools that aren't particularly good for whatever reason never get to drop down, and so you still end up with all these lopsided scores, sort of regardless of how much they finagle the number of classifications and the way schools are classified and how often they're classified. Never seems to change. There's still a whole bunch of blowouts in high school football, and there's still a select number of competitive games. To me, the solution is something more like what hockey does. In Pennsylvania, high school hockey exists outside of the PIAA structure. They set their own rules. In Western Pennsylvania, we have the PIHL, which has set a classification system that's pretty simple. If you win, you move up, and if you lose, you move down. And it's similar to a promotion relegation system like you see in European soccer and other European sports. It's not that complicated. The best teams play the best teams, the middle teams play the middle teams, and the bad teams play the bad teams. And really, that's what the structure that was initially put in place was attempting to create, a competitive balance. It's just that, for a lot of reasons, a small school in one place might be a lot better every year in and year out, than a small school in another place. It has to do with income backgrounds and demographical distribution and just tradition, history, coaching, budget, there's a lot that goes into it. But I mean, it doesn't matter how many kids are at the school. You can expect certain schools to be better than other schools, and we can see that over years and years and years of results. It would not be that difficult to, forgetting the classifications, pick the 8 best football teams in Western Pennsylvania and put them in the same league. And you can make it a formula so that it's fair, it's not subjective. It could be based on number of wins or Gardner points or however you want to do it. It doesn't matter. Make there be a subjective method of determining the 8 best teams and make that the highest classification. It doesn't matter if that's a public school, Catholic school, private school. It makes no difference because it's based on the talent level that's been displayed and not any other off the field, whether it's geographical limits, whether it's school size. Those things ultimately, yes, they play a part, but they aren't the biggest part of what happens on the field. And so by basing the classifications on who wins and who loses, to me, that's going to do the best job of providing an equal playing field. It's going to do the best job of providing interesting matchups, and it's going to completely solve the issue of how fair it is to have schools that don't have geographical boundaries playing against schools that do, because it doesn't matter. The schools are going to play the schools that win about the same amount that they do, and that's the bottom line. And I think something like that is badly needed, and I think something like that would be hugely popular in this area. It's a place that loves high school football. It's a place that really does love high school football, played at a high level. Like I'm saying, this Central Catholic North Allegheny game this week is a big deal. People are going to come out to see it because it's a big game. And so whatever method that's used to determine who plays who, to me, I think that is the thing that matters way more than this political debate over geography or the number of incoming male freshmen or whatever the old formula used. To me, I think that's the thing that matters the most, and that should be the way forward. I'm just not sure if anyone at the PIAA is forward-thinking enough to do something like that. I don't know if it would pass the broad-based political test that is often required to make different kinds of adjustments to things that have been, bargained for over the years or promised to people. I don't know. I don't know if it's feasible, but to me, I think there is a solution that makes sense for everyone, and it's there. I just think I'm the only one that's talking about it. So let me know what you think. Send me a comment. I'm sure lots of WPIAL coaches, players have an opinion about this. I'd like to hear from you, and we'll talk about it again next week, I think, if we get enough responses. I certainly think this is a topic that merits more than 12 minutes. But that's all we're going to talk about it right now. I'm going to move on to what I think is the biggest game of the weekend in Pitt versus Penn State over at Heinz Field, Saturday, 8 p.m., ABC national broadcast, under the lights. Pitt safety DeMar Hamlin told me this week the whole city's going to shut down, and I think he's pretty much right. I think it's a big deal and a big game, and a lot of the talk coming up to the game has been about the rivalry, whether Penn State actually considers Pitt to be its rival, whether Penn State should be playing Pitt throughout the foreseeable future or not. And I feel like we haven't talked about the game enough. I feel like we've sort of sold ourselves short a little bit in that there's going to be a very competitive football game played at Heinz Field this Saturday that's going to have a serious impact on both of these teams' seasons. Penn State as a team with national championship aspirations. They feel like they're one of the top 10 teams in the country. They feel like they're a contender to come out of what is a very difficult division in the Big Ten East. And I don't think you can think all those things if you lose to Pitt in week 2 after having a tough time with Appalachian State in week 1. So maybe a loss for Penn State doesn't go down against them in the Big Ten standings. Maybe like 2 years ago, it's something they could eventually recover from. But if you remember 2 years ago, it was essentially that non-conference loss to Pitt that kept Penn State from being in the college football playoff. This game matters for Penn State. Whether they want to call it a rivalry or not is irrelevant because it matters a lot to their goals for this season. And when James Franklin says it's the biggest game because it's the one that's on the schedule this week, he's kind of being a jerk and downplaying what is a historic rivalry. But he's right because it is an important game for Penn State. And I think all the rehashing of the drama of the whether or not it's a rivalry kind of loses sight of that. And if you're Pitt's got the toughest non-conference schedule in the country. Plus, they've got Virginia Tech and Miami on their conference schedule. And this is a team that Pat Narduzzi thinks can go to the ACC championship game. To do that, they're going to have to win those games. They're going to have to beat a Miami or a Virginia Tech, if not both. And if you're a team that's going to roll through the Coastal Division and knock off some ranked teams in Miami and Virginia Tech on your way to the ACC championship game, that team doesn't lose to Penn State at home, or at least that team makes it real close with Penn State at home. I don't think Pitt can feel like they're a team that's going to accomplish all their goals if they come out and have the kind of performance they did last year against Penn State when it wasn't even really as close as the final score. The Lions pretty much rolled. So I think this is a really important game. And what we're going to do, I'm going to break down what I think is the biggest matchup of this game. To me, it starts and ends with quarterback play in college football so often, but especially in this kind of game, in this kind of atmosphere, when mistakes are magnified. To me, the quarterback that wins this game is going to be the quarterback that plays better, almost certainly. And you have a couple of really good college quarterbacks in Tracy McSorley and Kenny Pickett. Tracy McSorley's been a Heisman candidate. He's been to big-time bowl games. He's been to the Big Ten championship game. He's won this game a year ago. He's kind of a been-there, done-that guy. In fact, I think a lot of people were somewhat surprised that he came back for a senior season at Penn State. I think it was probably a guy that made the right decision. I'm not sure he's exactly what the NFL is looking for when it comes to a pocket passing quarterback, but he's a heck of a college football quarterback. He's one of the best college football quarterbacks in the country. And yet, every time I look at film of Trace McSorley, whether it was 2 years ago or last year in this game, or whether it's whatever game I watch that Penn State is playing, and then I go look at Kenny Pickett at practice every week, man, they're a lot of the same guy. They do a lot of the same things well. They have strong arms, fairly accurate. They're extremely elusive. They use their feet very well. They're quick. I think what you saw last year a lot from a guy like Max Brown, or even 2 years ago when Pitt had Nathan Peterman, yeah, a guy that could run a little bit if you had to ask him to, but didn't have the kind of quickness or athletic burst that either of these two guys have. And so when I set out to make this kind of my thing, I wanted to look at some rate stats to compare the two players, because obviously, if we just pile up the yards and the completions and the touchdowns, it's going to be pretty significantly in McSorley's favor because he's played a whole lot more. But I wanted to look at the rate stats and just see, in Kenny Pickett's kind of short time as a college football player, how they've stacked up. So this is what I came up with here. And if you take a look at the graphic, it's extremely competitive. I mean, Pickett's a little bit taller. He's a little bit thicker. But completion percentage, very close. Yards per attempt, within a yard. Passer rating, McSorley, about 20 points higher. With the legs, Pickett, about over a yard per carry more, and about the same number of touchdowns per game. So when you look at a per rate basis in 3 games, Kenny Pickett has basically been Trace McSorley. The difference is the track record, right? You break it down right there at the bottom. 1 start for Pickett, 28 from McSorley coming into this game. And I think what we're going to see play out one way or the other is, will Kenny Pickett on this stage be the same quarterback that he's been in a big game against Miami, or in mop-up time against NC State or at Virginia Tech? Or will he fail to rise to the occasion of the game, whether it's inexperience or some other reason, and play subpar football, or at least his expectation football, which to me, the expectation is this quarterback battle should be a draw. And we'll see, though, how much that experience plays and how much of an advantage that does give Trace McSorley. I think mistakes, I said it before, mistakes are going to be amplified. Turnovers, they're going to kill whichever team commits more of them. And that happens in most football games. But I think in the emotional setting that you're talking about, momentum is going to be a thing. The team that gives away the ball is going to lose it in a big way. And, so I think there's the potential for this to be pretty much a draw at the quarterback position. I think you could say Trace McSorley pretty much by far is Penn State's best player. So to me, the fact that Kenny Pickett has the ability to play to his level says a lot about Pitt's chances in this game. I brought this up to Pitt head coach Pat Narduzzi in his last media briefing on Thursday, and I think he pretty much agreed with my premise, but we'll go over to Pat here and see what he had to say about it. What's the big difference to you? Is it just the experience? What sort of stands out to you?
I would say it's the experience. I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, they're two guys that love the game of football, that are smart. Both are athletic and make plays with the feet. They can make plays with their arm. But, you know, Tracy's got, you know, he's got years on Kenny. He's got game experience. He's been there before and played in big games and made big plays in big games too. And he's learned from mistakes that he's made. You know, Kenny's the puppy of the two. So, but they are very similar guys, which is it's a good thing for them and it's a good thing for us for the future.
How do they use that?
And so I actually liked the last bit there for Narduzzi. It says that, yeah, they're pretty similar players. That's good for Penn State this year because McSorley has the experience. That's good for Pitt going forward because McSorley's a senior and Pitt has 2 more years of Kenny Pickett. But I'm interested to see how that plays out throughout the game. It's certainly something I'm going to be watching for. And I think, to me, that matchup and the potential for that matchup to be relatively even is the thing that gives Pitt fans, or should give Pitt fans, the biggest hope for an upset victory, because I think if they can get equal quarterback play, I like Pitt's chances. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is home field advantage. Home field advantage is one of the most underrated things in college football. It's not necessarily the environment in the game. It's just everything leading up to it. You know, you're talking about guys that haven't played that much football. They're young. And you take them out of a comfortable environment and you put them into an uncomfortable environment. You put them on a bus. You put them in a hotel room. You put them in an uncomfortable, drab, dreary visitor's locker room. And you put them in front of a hostile crowd. And on the flip side, having, you know, a home team be able to go through its routine that it goes through 6, 7, 8 times a year, it's familiarity. It's having their stuff, their guys, they're at home. And I think one of the things that Pat Narduzzi recognized when he came to Pitt was that Heinz Field didn't feel like home. Pitt practices on the south side almost every day, but Narduzzi's made a serious point to get over to Heinz Field more often than his predecessors have. He brings it up that we need to be over there more often than we are. Pretty much anytime you broach the subject with him. But I do feel like Heinz Field has become a place where Pitt feels like they have an advantage. And then you have the atmosphere and the crowd, which I do expect to be a partisan Pitt crowd. I felt like it was 2 years ago. I feel like, if anything, it will be more so this time. I feel like Pitt fans have waited a long time to have a game like this that's on the national stage, that's against their most hated rival, that's in their city, in their building. And I just feel like there's a level there that exists in Pitt fans that hasn't quite been reached yet, at least in the time that I've been covering the team. But I feel like this is the time it comes out. And I also love the way that athletic director Heather Like changed the student section around, put the students all the way across one end zone. I think it's going to make playing into that end zone meaningful for visitors, and I'm excited to see how that plays out this week too. So I'm not really a big prediction guy. My usual quip when people ask me for predictions was, if I was good at that, I would be in Vegas making money instead of being a sports writer and not really making money. So I'll give it my best shot here. I see a very even playing field for these two teams. I think Pitt has an advantage playing at home. I think that's an underrated advantage. I think Penn State has the best player in Tracy McSorley between the two teams. But Pitt has a pretty competitive answer at quarterback. Penn State didn't look particularly good against Appalachian State. Thought Pitt looked fine, if not great, in the first half against Albany. So I'm gonna cop out and say I like the Panthers and the points. with 9-point spread. I expect this to be a close game, a one-possession game, and I wouldn't be terribly surprised if it goes into overtime, especially just because that would annoy me as a writer and make me write until 1 in the morning. So that sounds about right. So that's my prediction. I don't have a score for you or anything like that, but I'm expecting a close game and a Pitt cover. Do not place any of your hard-earned money anywhere on my advice, please. All right, let's talk pro football. Finally, I don't have a lot to say about Le'Veon Bell that hasn't already been said by a lot of people, by anybody. Deb on the street on the Channel 2 News had a lot to say about Le'Veon Bell. Everybody has an opinion. To me, I just think, sort of much like I talked about the talk of rivalry detracting from the Pitt-Penn State game, I think the talk of whether or not Bell plays is detracted from the Steelers have a non-cakewalk Cleveland team this year to lead off their schedule. The Browns were aggressive in the offseason in improving their team, maybe more so than anybody else in the National Football League. And, this was a field goal game last year. This was a game that was close. And I think, I don't think the Steelers should be expecting to walk into Cleveland and walk out with an easy 3-score victory 3 hours later with or without Bell. Certainly not without, but even with, this is a more competitive Cleveland team on paper. It's a game that has given the Steelers some trouble. In fact, road games in general over the last few years they went 8-1 on the road last year, 5-3 the year before that, 4-4 the year before that. Has not been one of the hallmarks of Mike Tomlin's tenure that the Steelers are particularly strong on the road. They were last year, although they were just a good team in general last year. But I don't feel like this is a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination. And the other thing to me is this is a game that I fully expect the Steelers to get a lead in at some point. And in fact, I would probably wager that the Steelers will get a multi-score lead at some point. They'll go up by 9 or 10 or 12 or 14 or something like that at some point. And then we're going to have to see if this Steelers defense can hold a lead. Because what you're doing when you're holding a lead is trying to minimize big plays and make tackles in space to prevent small plays from turning into big plays. And to me, that puts a lot of stress on the middle of the defense. It puts stress on the inside linebackers. It puts stress on the safeties. And those are the positions that are big question marks for the Steelers defense and maybe the Steelers as a whole as we enter this season. How's Vince Williams going to be as the primary inside linebacker? How are the rest of those linebackers going to play when asked to cover in space? And how much are the Steelers going to play this new dollar defense? How's it going to work? We haven't seen a lot of all of those things happen. And so it's hard for me to sit here and say, well, the Steelers go up 14-0 in the first quarter, this game's over. I don't buy that. I think Cleveland has the offensive talent to come back into the game, and I'm not sure how good the Steelers defense is going to be at preventing that from happening. And so, so 4-point spread at Vegas. I think that sounds about right. I think this is going to be a close and tough game for the Steelers to open their season, and whether or not they have Le'Veon Bell. And to be honest, I think James Conner is poised to show some people that he's a guy that can contribute at the NFL level. And so I'm paying a lot less attention to who's starting at running back than I am to all those other things when I sit down to watch a Steeler game this Sunday. That's what I've got for you. The last thing I want to do, and I'm going to do this every week, is I'm going to pimp our coverage at Pittsburgh Sports now a good bit. We're going to be in a couple of different places this weekend, and I want to let you all know about it. Friday, that's tonight. We talked about it. NA Central Catholic, Steve Brenner out there in the North Hills, 7:30 kickoff for that one. Then tomorrow, the appetizer, if you will, Dukes have Valpo. Interesting matchup in FCS. Valpo's a tough team from the Pioneer League, scored a bajillion points last year. Parker Hurley will be there. David Haig will have photographs. And then 8 o'clock, the main event. Myself, Mike Vukovcan. Dave will be coming across town to join us. Pitt, Penn State, Heinz Field. Don't miss that one because it's going to be the last time we get to do this for a while as a city. I'm excited about it. It's a thing I'm looking forward to cover, and I'm sad it might be the last one I get to do for a while, especially here in Pittsburgh. that's all I've got for this week. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out a lot, and you won't miss anything that we post here, whether it's hockey, whether it's football, whether it's basketball. When basketball season rolls around, you want to stay up to date. And then, follow, please, all of our coverage at Pittsburgh Sports now as we continue through the high school, college, and professional football season. That's it for now. I'm Alan Saunders, Pittsburgh Sports Live. We'll see you next week.